Okay, hi everyone. This is going to be the problem video for chapter 4. We have 4 exercises here, then a big problem to do. So the first few problems will be a little bit shorter. The last problem will be longer, probably like half the lecture. So with that, right, let's get started here. Let's look at exercise 4.1. We have Quality Brick Company. They produce bricks in 2 processing departments. They have a molding department and a firing department. Information relating to the company's operation in March is as follows. So it looks like they have A through F events that happened. And what they want us to do here under the required section, they say, can you please prepare journal entries to record the items up above? Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is 2, 4, 6 journal entries that we're going to do. This is in a process costing system, right? We're looking at a brick company, so it makes sense that it would be a process costing system. They make a very homogeneous product, the same thing. Over and over. It's fungible, right? You can't really tell any difference one brick from the other. And in that capacity, they have different departments, right? It looks like they have a molding and a firing department. It's like different steps in the process of making a brick. So we have to do A through F here. And A, right, if we look at it, it says raw materials used in production. In the molding department, there were 23,000. In the firing department, there were 8,000. Okay, so what we're going to do here is debit WIP for the molding department, debit WIP for the firing department, and then credit raw materials. And it looks like it's going to be 23, 8, and then 31. So essentially, right, in this case, we're going to see here how it works is, you start, in this case, even though we're using a process costing system, it's the same overall idea of you start on the balance sheet with your product costs, right, as we work through each process layer or system. We're gonna assign, in that case, our manufacturing overhead, look at our direct materials, our direct labor, and then later when you sell it, right, that's when you're gonna take the expense on the income statement. So right now what we're doing is we're building up in our departments the WIP inventory. Okay, we're gonna see some other items that build that up. B here. It says direct labor costs in the molding department were 12,000, and in the firing department were 7,000. Okay, so again for B, it's going to be a similar entry. We're going to debit the WIP for the molding department, debit the WIP for the firing department, credit wages payable. Right, it looks like 12, 7, and not 29, 19. Okay, again, we're building up the inventory, capitalizing it, absorption costing on the balance sheet as we continue to build the product. And we do this, right, in each department. See here, so we looked at our direct materials, we looked at our direct labor. C is going to talk about manufacturing overhead. And specifically what they're saying here is that we applied manufacturing overhead in the molding department of 25,000 and in the firing department of 37,000. Okay, so similar setup here. Debit WIP for the molding department. Debit WIP for the firing department, then we're going to credit manufacturing overhead, right? This is that applied manufacturing overhead, so we're crediting it. It looks like for the amounts here, right? For C, it was 25, 37, which means in this case, right, our manufacturing overhead has to be 62. All right, let's look at D. D says, unfired molded bricks were transferred from the molding department to the firing department. According to the company's process costing system, the cost of the unfired molded bricks was $57,000. So essentially what happens here is we have the transfer from like one department to the other. Department A finishes their part of the job. We're now transferring it over to Department B. So in this case, right, according to the facts, we're now transferring it over to the firing department. So we're going to debit our WIP for firing. That's increased. And we're taking it out of our molding department. And the amount of the cost here, right, was $57,000. Okay. E says, finished bricks were transferred from the firing department to the finished goods warehouse. According to the company's process costing system, the cost of the finished bricks was $103,000. Okay, so now what's happened is we brought some stuff into the firing department. At the same time or later on, we took items out of the firing department. We were finished with making the bricks. We put them in finished goods now, right? So what we're going to do in this case is debit our finished goods, credit our WIP from our firing department. It said here, right, the cost, according to the records, was $103,000. F says finished bricks were sold to customers. According to the company's process costing system, the cost of the finished bricks was $101,000. Okay, so F, what we're going to do here is now we sold the bricks, right? So we're going to do debit cost of goods sold, credit finished goods, and the cost was 101, right? So it's like all of this up here, A through E, what we were doing in this case was all balance sheet items. However, once we sell it, right, then we're going to take the expense on the income statement. And really what you're doing is, in many of these instances is you're like building it up and molding, building it up and molding, building it up and molding. Then, hey, you finish it in molding, transfer it out of there through a credit, right? The reverse, debit, 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 get it out through a credit, put it in the next department, right? Firing. And then, hey, it's finished from firing, you debited it there, you get it out at firing with a credit. That point in time, right, we have our finished goods. When we sell them, we reverse it out through a credit, and then we take the expense. So this is just showing you the flow of it, right? It's going through different processing departments. Once it finishes in one, it goes to the next, goes to the next. At some point, depending on the nature of the business, there could be 2 process departments, there could be, several. At some point when you finish the product, then it goes to finished goods. Then when you sell it, it goes out of finished goods and you take the expense. Okay? Let's look here at E42. Okay, so it says Clonex Labs uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. The following data are available for one department for October. So they're giving us some information about the beginning amount, at the beginning of the month, then at the end of the month, with regard to how many units we have, and the percentage they're complete with respect to materials and conversion costs. And we said, conversion costs, what you're really referring to there is your direct labor and your manufacturing overhead. You kind of lump those together. It's called conversion cost. Now it says here the department started 175,000 units into production during the month, and it transferred 190,000 completed units to the next department. Okay, so we're looking at, in this case, one department, right? And it started 175 and it transferred 190 to the next department. Now what they want us to do is complete the equivalent units of production for October. Now if we remember from the PowerPoint, the equivalent units of production, what that's going to be is the units transferred out, right? You produce those in the department, plus the equivalent units in the department's ending WIP, right? That's going to give you the department's equivalent unit of production. Okay, so let's kind of snag this and we can use that as a template to work from over here. So we're going to have to account for here our direct materials and our conversion costs. So in this way, right, we said, hey, we transferred 190,000 units out. So we know when we're looking at, how much we produced in this case, we're going to have 190,000. Next, what we have to do in this case is we have to find our equivalent units in ending WIP. Okay, when we look at this, right, October 1st, that means this guy's going to be our beginning WIP. And October 31st, right, that's going to be our ending WIP. So we need to focus on, this column here. And what we're going to do is, right, we're going to say that, hey, we have 15,000, right, units at that point in time. And with respect to materials, they're 80% complete. So that means 12,000 units there. With respect to conversion costs, right, we have 15,000 units and they're 40% complete. Right, so then what we're going to do is add these two together, right, just following the equation there. And we can see in that way that our equivalent units of production for direct materials are going to be 202,000. For conversion costs are going to be 196,000. In other words, it's going to be what we transferred out, right? And then the equivalent units here in our ending WIP, adding those together. All right, let's look at exercise 4.3. So I put a couple items in there already. Looks like we have Superior Micro Products. They're using the weighted average method in its process costing system. Data for the assembly department for May appears below. Okay, so we're looking at a specific department. We're looking at the assembly department. So here's information for it. What they want us to do in this example is, can you please compute the cost per equivalent unit for materials, labor, overhead, and in total. Now, we learned in the PowerPoint, right, that the cost per equivalent unit, this is going to equal basically your total cost, which is, if you were to put the equation for that, it would be the cost of your beginning WIP plus your costs added during the period. And below that is going to be your equivalent units of production. So let me just merge and center these so we can let me get rid of that mouse there. We can make this guy yellow, this guy light blue, and that's the equation, right? So that's what we're trying to do in this case. So you can see how it's building off of it, right? Like last time we calculated equivalent unit to production. Now we're looking at cost per equivalent unit. So what we have to do in using this formula is kind of carry it over here, right? So we're going to have our cost of our beginning WIP plus the costs added during the period. That's going to give you your total cost. So let's start with that, the numerator. Cost of beginning WIP with regard to materials in this case. We're going to have 18, and then we added 238.9. So our total cost with respect to materials was 256,900. With direct labor, right, we started with 5,500 there. We added 80,300. 5,500 plus 80,300. Looks like with regard to direct labor, we're looking at a total cost of 85,800. Then with regard to overhead, right, we started with 27.5. Looks like we added 4,015. Looks like we're going to be at 429,000. Right, so let's make these yellow just to signify that, hey, we're talking about yellow down here, right? You add those two together, it's going to be the yellow numerator and down there. Next, we got to look at the denominator, okay? So, this is going to be our equivalent units of production. And we can snag this right from over here, right? It looks like for materials, it's 35. For labor, it's 33. For overhead, it's 33. So 35,000. 33,000, 33,000. Let's make this light blue to conform with the light blue down there. Right, so in this way, right, if we're going to try to figure out our cost per equivalent unit, which is what they're asking us for materials, labor, overhead, and in total, right, you're going to take your numerator divided by your denominator. Looks like it's 734 with regard to materials. Can copy and paste that formula over. It's going to be 260 with regard to labor. And then it's going to be 13 with regard to overhead. So that gets us 1, 2, 3 right there. Now we got to do in total, right? Our total amount. So that's just going to be the sum of those three guys, right? Add them together. Looks like in total, we're looking at 2294. All right, let's look at exercise 4.4. Okay, this says data concerning a recent period's activity in the prep department. Okay, so we're looking at the prep department, which is the first processing department, appears below, right? So it looks like there must be a prep department, then it goes to another department, so on and so forth. We're looking at the prep department, which is the first department. And what they're giving us here, right, is equivalent units and ending WIP for materials and conversion. And then they're giving us the cost per equivalent unit. So again, you can see how this is building off of the prior examples. They said a total of 20,100 units were completed and transferred to the next department during the period, right? So it looks like we transferred over roughly 20,000 units. Now what they're asking us here are two items. They say, one, can you please compute the cost of ending WIP for materials conversion and in total? Two, can you please compute the cost of the units completed and transferred out for materials conversion and in total? All right, so the first one they want from us is ending WIP, right? And they want that with regard to materials, conversion costs, and then they want in total as well. All right, so the idea here, if we're going to calculate and compute the cost of ending WIP, what it's going to be in this case is it's going to be the equivalent units you have in ending WIP, and that's going to be times the cost per equivalent unit. It's going to give you the cost of ending WIP. Makes sense, right? However many units you have in there times the cost of the equivalent unit. So in this case, right, if we come over and we snag the material, it looks like we have 2,000 in materials, equivalent units, and they have a cost of $13.86. Right, so all we need to do here is multiply down. Looks like we're at cost there of $27,720. With regard to conversion costs, right, we have 800 equivalent units in ending WIP that have a cost per equivalent unit of $443. If you carry that down, right, it looks like we're going to be staring at $35.44 with regard to conversion costs. So in total, right, if we were to add those together, we'd be at $31,264. So that's for ending WIP. Likewise, they want us to compute the cost of the units completed and transferred out. Right, so we just looked at ending WIP here. Now we want to see the cost of the units that were carried out. So in this case, right, we're looking at the units transferred out. And the idea here is it's going to be the transferred units, how many we transferred out, times the cost per equivalent unit. Right, that's going to give you, in this case, the cost of the units transferred, which they're asking for there. And we need to do this for materials, conversion costs, and in total. We go over here, right? What we can say in this case, right? It looks like, hey, we sent out to the next department 20,100 units. In the cost per equivalent unit, they've given it 1386, 443, right? 1386, 443. So what we're gonna do here, right, is just multiply down. Right, so it looks like with regard to materials, the cost of the units that we transferred out were 278. With regard to conversion costs, they were 89,000. In total, right, if you were to add them together, we're looking at $367,000. All right, let's look at problem 413 here. This is like a longer problem, so this is going to be the bulk of the lecture. So if we zoom in a little bit, looks like Old Country Links. I don't know if that's like a play off like Old Country Buffet or something, but Old Country Links produces sausages. Okay, like sausage links, that makes sense. And it has 3 production departments. I don't like when they do this, when they put in there in the middle, because it looks like there's actually 4. But they have mixing, right, casing and curing, and packaging. Now they say in the mixing department, meats are prepared and ground and then mixed with spices. Okay, so I guess the idea here is if like you think about a sausage, right? It starts with raw meat, and they mix it up. They put the spices in. So that would be the first step in this, in the processing of sausages, if you were to make them. And it says the spiced meat mixture is then transferred to the casing and curing department, where the mixture is force-fed into casings and then hung and cured in a climate-controlled smoking chamber. All right, so once it goes from the one department to the next, basically it then puts them into the casings, right? That's like the sleeve, the edible sleeve that the meat, the sausage meat goes into, and then they cure it and so on. And then it says in the packaging department, the cured sausages are sorted, packed, and labeled. So basically, hey, once it's done, like kind of being made, then we send it to packaging. And packaging will do all of the packaging for it. It says the company uses the weighted average method in its process costing system. Okay, so again, this would make sense to use a process costing system here if you're making and producing sausages. In that case, it's all going to be like uniform, very similar, homogeneous product. And it says the data for September with regard to the casing and curing department is as follows. They give us some information here. It says in this case, right, when you're looking up here, mixing, right, it says mixing costs represent the cost of the spiced meat mixture transferred in from the mixing department. Okay, so the idea here is, if I were to draw this, right, we have our mixing department, then we have our casing and curing department, and then we have our packaging department. This is the one we're looking at, right? Casing and curing. But they're saying, hey, when we look at mixing here, right, what that really is that's going to represent the cost of like the meat that was transferred in from the mixing department when it goes from one processing department to the next. It says the spiced meat mixture is processed in the casing and curing department in batches. So each unit in the above table, okay, so units right here when they say 1, 1, that's going to be a batch of basically the spiced meat mixture, and it produces a set amount of sausages that are passed on to the packaging department. Okay, during September, 50 batches or units were completed and transferred to the packaging department. Okay, so during September, I don't want to draw right there because we're going to use this information. Just be aware we sent 50 batches over there. All right, so let's look at what they're asking us here, and it will make more sense as to how we analyze this when we go through the requirements. So 1 says, can you please determine the casing and curing department's equivalent units of production for mixing, materials, and conversion for the month of September? Do not round off your computations. Okay, so for 1, right, so what we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items to do here. 1, they want the equivalent units of production. Let's just start this up here, right? So 1, they want equivalent units of production. And we said, right, we've looked at a problem with this, that's going to be the units transferred out of the department plus the equivalent unit in ending WIP is going to be your equivalent units of production. Right, let's just make this red and that blue. And we can map this out over here, right? So we're going to have our units transferred out. We're going to have our equivalent units in ending WIP. Let me make this all right, so what we have to do here in this case is they want it for mixing, materials, and conversion. Right, so we have mixing, materials, and conversion. Right, now they told us in the facts, if we're going to start here with units transferred out, that we completed and transferred out 50 batches. Right, so 50 batches or 50 units. Right? That's what we transferred out. Now we have to look at the equivalent units in our ending WIP, which are going to be comprised of our mixing, our materials, and our conversion costs over here. Right? So we're going to use the information from this guy to help us here. Right, we're looking at ending WIP, so we're going to be focusing right here on the September 30th. It's ending WIP, the end of the month. So with regard to mixing, right, it looks like we are 100% complete. Right, with regard to materials, right, it looks like we're 80% complete. And with regard to conversion costs, right, it looks like we're 70% complete. And all of this is of 1 unit, right? 100% complete of 1 unit, 80% complete of 1 unit, 70% complete of 1 unit. So what we now have to do in this case, put that bottom border there, is just add these up, right? We're just basically following an elongated version of that formula, right? We're gonna have 51, 50.8, and 50.7 equivalent units of production. All right, so let's just label that yellow as kind of our starting point, because we're gonna carry this down as we go forward, use some of this information later on. 2 here. Right, so we can put the check mark here next to 1. Took care of that. 2 says, can you please compute the casing and curing departments? They want the cost per equivalent unit for mixing, materials, and conversion for the month of September. Okay, so for 2, right, we want the cost per equivalent unit. And we've looked at this before, right? This is going to be basically your total cost, or the cost of your beginning WIP, plus your costs added during the period, divided by your equivalent units of production. So let me merge and center this. So in this way, right, we got to do our costs of our beginning WIP plus our costs added during the period is going to be our total costs. And we have to do that with regard to mixing, materials, and conversion costs. Okay? So in this way, right, we're going to here look at our beginning WIP. Okay? So we go over here, September 1st. That's why I said you have to be careful if they're asking for beginning or ending. You see how they try to trick you? They give you beginning, ending, or cost added. So in this case, right, the cost of our beginning mixing was $16.70. During the period, it looks like we added $81,460. For materials, our cost of beginning WIP was $90. It looks like we added $6,006. And for conversion costs, we started at $605, and then we added $42,490. So what we're going to do is just add them together to figure out our total costs, what you started with, and then what costs you added. So that will give us, in this case, do that there. That's going to give us the numerator, right? So our numerator is right here. But, right, we have to divide that by the denominator, right? So we got to get our equivalent units of production. Now, where can we get that? Oh, wait, right? We just solved for that before, right? It's these guys right up here. See, this problem, it's all going to build off each other. So we can just link this right up. Make it red just to show you the flow. And then what we're going to get then is our cost per equivalent unit, what they're asking us, right? The answer. Basically applying that formula, right? If you took your total costs divided by your equivalent unit of production, your total cost divided by your equivalent unit production with respect to materials, and then your total cost divided by your equivalent unit of production with regard to conversion costs. Okay? So that will take care of 2 there. So let's put a little check mark next to 2. Let's look at 3. It says, can you please compute the casing department's cost of ending WIP? All right, so now they want the cost of ending WIP for mixing materials and conversion, and in total for September. All right, so they want mixing, materials, conversion, and in total. For 3. Okay, so we've done this. This problem, essentially what we've done here, like in these we did journal entries, then we did like the equivalent of A, the equivalent of B, the equivalent of C. Now we're showing this in like a bigger example, how it all connects to each other. Learn it separately, then apply it to see how it all relates and builds off each other. So for 3, right, they want the cost of ending WIP. Okay, and they want that, in this case, for mixing, materials, conversion, and in total. All right, now one of the things with 3 that will help us in this case, it's going to build on it later on, is to look at, in this, how we would calculate the cost of our ending WIP. And essentially what it would be in this case is going to be, get this over here, it's going to be our equivalent units, right, times the cost per equivalent unit. It's going to give us the cost of our ending WIP. Right, and our equivalent units, right, we can get from up here, but we've already done them, right? So we have equivalent units and ending, so we can just link these down, right? So it's going to be 1.8, 0.7. Let's make these blue. These guys here blue. Right, just to show you how these are flowing down. Oh man, sorry about this. Let me just, I've linked it wrong. Not a big deal. You can just delete it out, carry it up. I'm looking above, so it's sometimes when you're looking at the top of the spreadsheet and you're trying to man it with your peripheral vision, you can get a little lost. Not a big deal. We were able to figure that out. Then what we do is we have to figure out our cost per equivalent unit. And how can we get that? Oh wait, right? We just did that right up here. So we got, let's just make this green to show you where it's coming from. These are already blue from the last item there. Not a big deal. I can green them up. And then what we're going to do is just multiply. Right, 1630 of that case with regard to mixing. Let me draw a line here. We're looking at 96 with regard to materials. And we're looking at 595 with regard to conversion. So in total, right, if we were to add that plus our materials plus our conversion costs, in total we're looking at 2321. So that's for 3. Let's look at 4. For 4, they said compute the casing and curing department's cost of units transferred out to the packaging department for mixing, materials, conversion, and in total. Okay, we can do this, not a big deal. So for 4, we're looking at the cost of those items we transferred out into the next department. So we said, right, when we looked at this before, this is going to be, and again, we're looking at it for mixing, materials, conversion, total. So maybe I'll just carry this down to make it a little bit more explicit. And I'll move this down. Right, so we said with this guy, it's going to be your units transferred out. And then we're going to have our cost per equivalent unit. That's going to give you, in this case, right, if you multiply the two, the cost of the units transferred. Okay, so with this, right, we're going to go over to the facts again. It said in the facts that during September, we had transferred out 50 batches, okay? So when we're looking at our transferred out, the units, right, that would be 50 for mixing, 50 for materials, and 50 for conversion costs. Then we need to look at our cost per equivalent unit, right? Well, we already got that up here. This is going to be the, I don't have to act surprised this time because it's the this is going to be the third time we saw it. It's going to be, right, the 1630, the green, the green, the green, and we'll just multiply that down. And then we got to do it in total as well, right? So that would be the 81.5 plus the 6,000 plus the 42.5. So if we were to add these two together, we're at 132,321. So this number, we'll come back to here, but for the time being, just be aware you add those two together, that's it. So 4 we did. Let's put a check mark there. 5, it says, can you please prepare a cost reconciliation report? Okay. Now, when you're doing a cost reconciliation report, right, what you're reconciling, the point of it is a reconciliation. And the idea with it is going to be, let's make this red, and we're going to have our costs to be, accounted for. So this is going to be the cost of our beginning WIP. right? We have our costs added during the period, right? So the costs of our beginning WIP, right, that's going to equal, if we go up here, right, there's our ending WIP, cost transferred out per equivalent unit. We're going to use, in this case, let's go up here, here we go, right? There's the beginning WIP, I was hunting for that. So it's going to equal, right, the cost of our beginning WIP. You could snag it from over there, but what we did here is going to be for mixing 670, for materials 90, for conversion cost 605. Okay, and then our costs added from here. Let me just fix that. Go up. It's going to be the 81 equals 81 plus the 606 plus the 42490. We're looking at 129,956. Add these together. Right, 132,321. Likewise, right, we gotta reconcile this guy here. We have to do the costs of our ending WIP and the cost of the items transferred out. Right, so the cost of our ending WIP, let's go up here, it's going to be staring right in front of me, right, that 2321, or in other words, these three, right? And then the cost of our units transferred out, right, those three, that's why I did the math down here, or up here before to show you. Add those two together, we're at 132,321. Right, so we can now check that off. So again, just to summarize here, what's going on. We started, right, we're looking at 3 departments. We're focusing on the second one, the casing department. They gave us some information. First thing is we figured out equivalent units of production, right? From there, we did cost per equivalent unit. And when we did that, right, we had to carry the equivalent units of production down, right? And that got us our cost per equivalent unit. Third, we had to figure out the costs of our ending WIP, right? And in this case, we had to carry down our costs per equivalent unit, right? Fourth, what we did, we looked at our costs of the items we transferred out. Again, carry down that cost per equivalent unit. And then at the end, what we reconciled, right, is our beginning WIP plus the cost we added, that 132. That's going to equal, in this case, right, the cost of our ending WIP plus what we transferred out, 132. In other words, we had to reconcile, if you remember from financial accounting, kind of a bank reconciliation. The idea is this is just showing that, hey, it matches up, it balances. We have to reconcile or show that these two match up, okay? So that's going to be it for the problems videos. Uh, this chapter is kind of deceptive in the sense that uh, the PowerPoint and the problems, they start out, and when you're doing them, they seem a little straightforward. A lot of it's like simple math as long as you have organization. I would encourage you, like any chapter, to always look at the optional multiple choice questions, just because the way they word these can be like very wordy, and it is important to always see this in multiple choice format. So with that, I'll stop the lecture here. We will see you in the next chapter. Thank you very much.